Welcome back to A Bite from the Money Sandwich, where we provide practical and easy to understand tips and ideas on how to manage your money better, so as to let you retire with comfort and on your own terms.
Have you ever found yourself completely immersed in one pursuit, only to feel lost and uncertain once it's completed? Today, I'm joined by Danielle McDonough, a professional hockey player turned athlete, mindset coach, and CEO of Peak Performance Training. Danielle delves into the mental health hurdles athletes face and shares insights into the programs she has crafted to support them, which she also talks about in her book, The Empowered Athlete. Danielle highlights the importance of maintaining a healthy identity beyond sports and offers strategies for accountability, mindset, and growth. We also explore the significance of goal setting and the transformative potential of seeking help alongside the pivotal role coaches play, not only in just athletes' lives, but also for individuals striving to elevate their own pursuits to the next level. Well, welcome, Danielle, to the show.
Thank you so much, Marc. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
I'm really excited about this talk. I'm excited about doing podcasting. I'm excited every time I speak to anyone. But I love sport, and I've always loved sport. But I also feel sport can really help people in everyday life.
Agreed.
It's amazing. Yeah. As children, we're in team sports, and then one day we just, oh no, I don't need coaches or team sports anymore. I've got to get into the real life. I've got to grow up. But I always think people who have coaches and mentors throughout life are usually better off than not. Mm-hmm. So talking to you, I know you've written this great book, The Empowered Athlete. So if anyone looking out there, definitely jump onto Amazon or go to Danielle's website, and we'll provide all the information later. But what motivated you to write this book? I know you're an elite athlete but writing a book, not a lot of athletes get into.
Yes. So, and it's funny the timing that I actually decided to write this book. I feel like this book has been in me for a long time. I got into the sports psychology space. I got my master's degree back in 2012. And so I think shortly after that is when I sort of started thinking about, I should write a book, was when I was working with my athletes and my parents and that sort of thing. But when I actually decided to write it was years later, when I had a 3-year-old son and a 6-month-old daughter. That was when I decided, now's the time, which is crazy because I had to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. That's when I did my writing because the house was still quiet. But it was just sort of this overwhelming feeling of now is the time. I need to do it now. And so that's when I did it. It's been out now for a little over a year, but I think ultimately maybe what pushed me to do that was COVID definitely played a part. I wanted to be able to help more athletes than I'm able to as just one person, right? Working with my athletes one-on-one or now in my group setting. I wanted to be able to reach more athletes, reach more families, to be able to help them deal with the things that they're dealing with as elite athletes, and also post-COVID, because that sort of, shook things up a bit. And I started noticing athletes the pressure was a little bit greater, definitely throughout that year of the lockdown and then beyond that. And so I think that's kind of all of that combined kind of pushed me to write the book. But yeah, basically to get it out for more people to get their hands on and have a resource.
Yeah. And if they always say, if you want something done, ask a busy person. So having 2 young children, then deciding to write the book, I could totally understand.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely right. My book came out during COVID, and I could just see, something you're at home and you couldn't get out, and you understand the mindset of people, especially it must be for elite athletes who are just used to either a team environment, just being able to get out there and perform, and just being stuck at home. You must have lots of stories about just people on Zoom or on phone calls and just struggling.
Yeah, it was a really challenging time, for multiple reasons. But what I made this transition, it was sort of like, it's sort of like in a game when your first option isn't available and you have to quickly make that mental pivot into your option B. I feel like that's what I did because I I had an office setting where I was seeing my athletes and I was working one-on-one with athletes at the time. And then all of a sudden we weren't allowed to go outside and leave the house. And obviously neither were the kids. They couldn't go to school, they couldn't practice, they couldn't do anything. And so I quickly made this shift to the virtual setting via Zoom. And while I was working with my athletes, I noticed that they were all starting to get really depressed, to be quite honest, because they couldn't see their friends, they couldn't be with their teammates, they couldn't play their sport that they loved. And it's very similar for them, as it was for me. Hockey was my outlet, still is my outlet. So when things are kind of crappy around me, I could get on the ice and just forget it all. These kids couldn't do that. And so it was really, really hard. What I saw happening was what happened to me, what happens to a lot of professional and Olympic athletes when they stop playing, when they officially retire. They go through this sort of period of depression of like, now what? I've spent my entire life doing this, practicing, preparing for this. And now all of a sudden, I don't really know who I am anymore. I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know what to do. And I was seeing this now happen to these teenagers. And so that was hard to see. And so what I did was I created a group program to sort of help with that so that they could be, it's virtual, but they could be in a Zoom room together, interacting, seeing each other, and working towards, something to do with their sport. It's mental skills, but still I would do other things too for hockey players. We would do stuff with watching games and game film and that sort of thing. But yeah, it was a really trying time.
Yeah, and the mental side of any sport is tough, but COVID just took it to a whole new level. Like you're saying that, you would love to have had shares in Zoom when the COVID started, but because everyone just lived off Zoom, didn't they?
Right.
I actually, it'd be great talking about this a bit further, because one of the things I talk to a lot of retirees or people who are approaching retirement, and I say to them, your work life has been your community or your friends and all that, but you're going to stop work, and what are you going to do? You can't just sit there on the couch every day. And I do see a lot of people who retire and they were important people in their jobs or their life. And then they're sitting there and it just all stopped. And yeah, the depression really sits in. So, okay. So when you're talking to these athletes and they were depressed, and you were doing those sort of things, what did just being with other people, was that the main thing? Or did you have to start conversations, or just were people hard to open up? What was some of the challenges you have found?
Well, so it's funny because athletes in general, I think, are tough nuts to crack, but unless they're in front of the right person. And I think that, a lot of athletes let their guard down with me pretty quickly, because I've been where they want to go. And I've also experienced everything that there is not an athlete that can talk to me about something that they're going through that I haven't also gone through myself as a former elite athlete. And so I think that that's really helpful as well. But from the sport and identity piece that you kind of touched upon with the retirement, because of what I went through personally, I mean, it was a really dark time when I officially retired. I played collegiate level hockey at the D1, the D1 level. I played professional hockey after that in Canada and in Europe. And I think I kept playing because I was prolonging my career as long as I could, because I didn't know what I was going to do afterwards. And to think about it scared me a little bit. It freaked me out. I didn't want to think about it. So I pushed it away and I kept playing. And so because of that, and then what happened with COVID and seeing what these kids were going through, at such an early age, I started to incorporate that more into my coaching with them and my teaching and my programs, that sport and identity piece, because it's important for them to have and understand that their sport is not, it's not, I use this example with my hands. And if you're not watching, I'm sort of clasping my hands together. This is what it kind of becomes like when you're so entwined with your sport. And you also run that fine line of, if I'm not playing well, if I don't score a goal, that means I'm a bad person, right? And that's really dangerous territory to get into. And so what I start to teach is, because at the end, when you finally stop, it's like this whole piece of you is missing. And that's where that depression comes. And what I just did was pull my hands apart, right? And that's where that depression comes in, because it's like, oh my gosh, it's like this part of me is now gone. So instead I teach this. Now I'm holding up a fist, and then I, extend my fingers out. So one finger is me as the athlete. Another finger is I play the guitar. Another finger is I love dogs. Another finger is I like to paint. Another finger is, and you get the idea, right? And so it's like all these pieces make up who I am, and the palm, the main part of your hand is who you are. And each of these makes up who you are. And that hockey or that athlete piece is just a small part of it. So the whole idea is to, number one, identify these other pieces, because a lot of athletes don't. They don't have hobbies. They don't continue to do other things or hang out with their friends or experiment with new stuff, like, oh, maybe I'd like go-kart racing. I don't know, right? They don't do that. So the first step is to identify things that they like. And then the next step is to actually schedule time to do that. Because what happens when you're playing and you're so focused on this goal, which is great, but all that stuff kind of falls away. And then that's how, you get closer and closer to just becoming entwined with that sport. So if we continue to identify and, what we like, and then plan that time for them to do those things, like, and it doesn't have to be long, like an hour a month, maybe we'll go rock climbing, right? If that's something that they like. So then when they're done, when their sport isn't there anymore, it's okay, because they have all these other things that they like to do, if that makes
And I
sense.
think, and you write about that for a lot of athletes, their self-worth is
Mhm.
all entwined, as you had perfectly your example, hands entwined, and if your self-worth is all around one thing,
Mhm.
you're only one injury away, or if you retire, you're stopping work. You do need to actually start having multiple options or interest so
Mhm.
that you can see that. But you must get a lot of fight back, as I do for my retiree clients, saying, oh, well, no, I'll just keep on working. If they're saying, no, everything has been about hockey or football or whatever it is, it must be very hard to then get them to really think about, you do have other options.
Yeah, so when I'm working with them, when they're actively playing, they're teenagers or whatever it is they do the exercises that I ask them to do. And then it's a matter like of accountability. So I keep asking them, about their schedule, and if they've incorporated, XYZ into it this month. And, a big part of this is taking breaks as well. I try to encourage them to take at least 4 consecutive weeks off in the summertime. No school, no sport, just relax, do other things, be a kid type thing. And then and for the most part, they listen to me, and they do what I suggest that they do, because I do share my story. And, and also they've lived through that global pandemic now. And so they know what it's like. They know what it feels like, that feeling of not having it anymore. And, oh my God, what am I going to do with myself type thing. So it's kind of like they got a little bit of a taste of it, and they don't want that again. So when I give them these exercises to do and encourage them to pick up these other hobbies, they do, for the most part, take action on that. And then for the athletes that come to me later, maybe who are already in that state of, missing out, or the depression and that sort of thing, they listen to me too, because they don't want to feel like that anymore. They're in it. I don't want to feel like this anymore. You've felt like this. You went through it. You got through it. Tell me all the things type thing. Tell me what to do? Tell me how to fix this.
Yeah. And you said a word there, which it's something that's very important to me, accountability.
Mm.
And, a lot of what you're doing and you talk about and write about it's not you seeing an athlete or a person one off. What's your journey? What's your timeline? And, as you said, through COVID, it wasn't, okay, I'll talk to you once. No, I'm going to get you through this. I'm going to keep you look at, what your schedule is, what your training schedule is, or what you're going to do month by month, week by week. And having someone, and that's why, as athletes or anyone who plays sport, loved having coaches, because they kept them accountable. And I just say, if you want to save up for a home, if you want to do anything, you've got to be kept accountable. You can't,
Right.
New Year's resolutions. We've just been through New Year's, and New Year's resolutions don't last
No.
because usually you're not being kept accountable. So do you, how is your preferred way when you're keeping someone accountable? Is it a weekly, monthly, or is it just case by case basis?
So for those athletes that are involved in my program, it's weekly. I see them weekly. And with my program, the way it's designed now, since COVID, with that, I kept the group program, because what I was seeing was that accountability is a very powerful thing for them, not just from me, but from their peers. And these kids that are in the Zoom together, they're all very similar. They're all high level athletes who have big goals that they're working towards, and they're all also struggling with the same things. And when they come into this Zoom room, it's like, okay, I'm not the only one dealing with this. Because as athletes, we put up these strong fronts like, oh, yeah, I can't let on that this is a struggle for me. And why isn't anybody else struggling with this? Why is it just me? And the truth is that we all are. We just hide it very well, right? So they come into this room and that's that validation right away, and also the accountability and the motivation to keep going. So we meet once a week. And so that's really helpful for them too, to just constantly be in that environment and have the ability to speak on things that they need to, or to get the support that they need. And they really like it, because I'm not their parents. And at that age, they don't really listen to their parents anyways, but I'm not their parents. I'm not their friends. I'm not a teacher. I'm someone who's been in their shoes. And I think that really helps as well.
And failure is a big thing, to be able to, for a lot of, especially young people, I suppose people of any age, worried about going to our own business or doing something, oh, I could fail. Whereas, you do need to fail to learn from. And so, you talk about that. So, do you have a couple of tips that you sort of help when people when they open up and say, I could fail. What will I do if I fail?
Yeah, so that's a big topic of conversation somewhere along the way, and I don't know what age it happens at yet. Stay tuned. My kids are young, so I'm trying to pay close
They're your
attention to
guinea
see
pigs.
when I can spot it. Yeah, but somewhere our mindset shifts to not caring about making mistakes, falling down, that sort of thing, to all of a sudden, oh my God, I can't make that mistake, or AKA fail, right? Because it would be bad and so wouldn't like it and I would look bad and all these things. But in reality, you're right. Like, we need to fail. We need to make mistakes in order to grow and get better at whatever it is we're doing. Do you think about, so I try to help them make that mental pivot, and I have tools that allow them to um slowly adjust their mindset over time, because it's not a quick fix. It does take time. I call them programs that have been downloaded into their subconscious. And so in order to change those, it takes a certain set of tools and some time and consistency to do that. But at the end of the day, like, I will say to them, like, listen, when you were learning to walk, do you think you ever fell down? They're like, oh, well, yeah. And I said, well, did you stop? Like, did you quit? Because obviously they didn't. They're walking fine now. But the same thing with whatever sport they play. Hey, were you the fastest skater on the ice when you first started skating? And just to kind of like to get them to be a little bit silly and think about things in that way. And it's like, okay, well, yeah, I get that. And to understand, if you're not making mistakes, that means you're not pushing yourself outside your comfort zone either, right? And if we don't push ourselves outside our comfort zone, we stay in the same spot. And as athletes, the goal is to get better consistently, to achieve excellence, to master certain things, to get to that college scholarship if they want that, or whatever it is that they want, right? And we can't do that in our little comfort bubble. And the way that you're pushing yourself outside your comfort zone is if you're making mistakes. And when you make those mistakes, it's a huge opportunity for you to learn and grow. And so to start kind of looking at it as a positive thing instead of a negative thing that's really the key there. Now, this is hard because not all coaches have the same philosophy, and not all parents do, for that matter, either. But and so that makes it a little bit difficult when they're playing for a coach who, let's say, benches them every time they make a mistake, and that gets challenging. But then we work with that too. We deal through that. We focus on control and that sort of thing. But yeah, so it does get a little bit tricky sometimes.
Yeah, and you're making me smile because it's such a really good point. But I've, even as a 40-year-old still playing football, and I had a coach that, if you made a mistake, you were waiting for your name to be called out to be
Yeah,
benched, type of thing. And
yeah,
it's still some of the coaches,
yeah.
failure isn't an option type thing, and that you just realize you're setting yourself up to fail. But it really is important, and I think it's something. I've got 2 adult daughters, and I talk to them about, you just got to get outside your comfort zone. You can't, it's really nice to stay within the comfort, but if you're really going to succeed, if you're really going to grow, you've got to get outside the comfort zone. So I really like that connection with, yes, you're going to fail if you're going to get outside your comfort zone, but you can learn. It's a positive. Okay, so how is the struggle, especially you're talking about teenagers, and a lot of parents listening to this podcast will either have teenage children or older. Social media, it's
Oh,
just, that must be a topic of conversation every time you have your group meetings.
yeah, it's really challenging. My goal is to get kids off of social media, maybe not 100%, but to definitely get it way, way down. I teach about different mindset zones that we go through in and out of sport. And red zone is the zone that, where a lot more mistakes happen, where we're out of control, it can be erratic. And that's where that downward spiral starts to kick in and can really tank our performance, both in sport or while taking a test or having a conversation with someone, right? And so, and what I explain to them is the second you pick up your phone, you're in red zone. It may not seem like it, but as soon as you pick up your phone and you see all those notifications, like a text from mom, don't forget to pick up so and so after school. Oh, shoot, red zone. A calendar reminder. Oh, I have a paper due on Friday. Oh my gosh, I haven't even started it yet. Then the social media aspect, like so and so posted another highlight reel of them scoring the game-winning goal. Oh my gosh, why can't I be as good as them? So social media, they did a study, I think when Facebook first came out, or a couple years after Facebook came out, which, oh my gosh, I'm gonna age myself. I was in college. I think I was a junior or senior in college when Facebook came out, 2004, 2005. And they did a study a couple years later with the rise of social media, so went the rise of depression and anxiety with people who are involved with social media. So it is a place where comparison breeds and, judgment and self-doubt and all the negative self-talk starts to happen. I think I just put a post up about this, about adjusting that lens. So if you're good, first, the number one tip, stay off social media. The second tip would be, uh, instead of looking well, and also you have to remember that those are people's highlight reels. Very few, especially teenagers, are going to post things that aren't making them, putting them in a good light, right? So it's always going to be people's highlight reels. But if you look at it through a different lens, instead of the lens of comparing yourself to them, judging yourself because maybe you're quote unquote not as good as them or whatever it is, look at it from the lens of um, admiration, maybe, and motivation. So instead of seeing that highlight reel and being like, oh my gosh, it's so good, like why can't I be that good? Instead, identify what it is, right? What is what's catching your eye there? Maybe it's her slap shot. I'm gonna use a hockey reference. Maybe it's her slap shot. Wow, that slap shot is so good. I would love for my slap shot to be that good. Okay, I'm going to make it that good. What do I need to do? And then come up with a plan and then do it. And then, that now you're motivated, right? Anytime you see that highlight reel, use it as motivation instead of a chance to tear yourself down. Again, easier said than done. There's a process that kind of goes into this to help us make that mental adjustment. That's what I suggest to them. Number one, no social media. Number two, let's change the lens that we're viewing this from to make it more beneficial for us instead of harmful.
And is there an alternative? Like, if you're stopping social media for a lot of teenagers or 20-year-olds, millennials, that's a lot of their life, and I talk about it in productivity at work. If everyone's just looking at their phone and looking at every notifications, they're not concentrating on their work, and, even don't get your laptop to ping you every time you get a new email, just, so, but do you talk to your athletes and say, okay, I don't want you to be doing social media. Well, what should I be doing? Should I read a book? Or what do you do? Go out for a walk? Or what do you suggest?
Yeah. So with student athletes, I mean, their time is so jam-packed anyways that really, if they're going to spend an hour or two, I had an athlete who spent minimum 8 hours a day on social media. 8 hours. I mean, as student athletes, they don't have that time, right? They're in school, for 8 hours, then they come home and they have homework, then they have to go to practice, and they might even have a private lesson beforehand. Then they have more homework, and they also have dinner, and they have to get ready for, then go to sleep. So they really don't have that time anyways. So what I do suggest is a lot of times what I'll do with student athletes is go through each day and do sort of like a time audit to help them organize themselves and their time management and that sort of thing. And if, listen, I understand social media is important to them. I hope that they're following people that are uplifting and positive. But I will say, okay, well, why don't we plan to do our homework and we'll break it down. Let's do history for half an hour. Let's do English for half an hour, whatever it is. And then let's take a break. We're going to take a 15-minute break, set a timer. And if you want to scroll through social media, go ahead. But when that timer goes off, get back to what it was that you were doing. Because every minute they take away from doing their homework or getting outside and practicing what they need to practice or whatever it is, it just kind of, it's that circle of frustration, because now, like, if they're supposed to do homework, now they're getting behind. And then that's frustrating because now they're behind in their homework, or they didn't go out and practice like they wanted to. And now that's frustrating because now they missed that extra practice. Now they're not getting better at what they want to do. So having time set up and maybe using it as like a little break or something, but a timer to go off, saying, okay, on to the next thing now. I mean, that's a good compromise, I think. I mean, I'm not saying knock it down to just 15 minutes a day, like have those little increments throughout the day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, it's nigh impossible to sort of say stop it altogether, even though
Right.
I think for a lot it would be a good idea. But I think time management, that's a really good tip, because I think I'm sure a lot of your athletes will just say, once I actually did what I've done over a day or over a week, I was just surprised how much time I was spending on it. They just don't know.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's why the time audit's really important. And then if they do have extra time, I'll usually, depending on how their sport is structured, a lot of these kids have tournaments, like 9, 10 tournaments a year where they're leaving and missing school. So depending on how much extra time they have, I'll suggest getting ahead. Or if they're ahead, they've done everything they need to do, then yeah, I mean, I always suggest like doing things to shut the conscious mind off, because their conscious mind is just constantly going. Right? So if we can shut it off every once in a while through coloring or just listening to relaxing music or reading a non-school book, something like that, I think that's beneficial too. But for the majority of these kids, they just really don't have that extra time anyways. So
Yeah. I think it's also starting good habits, because a lot of people we talk in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, we're sort of saying, well, they're sort of saying they're living paycheck to paycheck. A similar example, and it's just they don't know where their money's going every month. And it's well, you've got to sit down and actually work out where it's going and look at your bank statements. It's the same sort of thing. You don't, if you don't know, it's of course your money will just go, but also your time, and time is so precious. Well, especially during COVID, you said a word before that I wanted to sort of go back to: motivation. Motivation, when it's sort of, okay, I'm going to Europe in 3 months' time. Absolutely, it's easy to motivate yourself to save or whatever it is. But when it's tough times, especially during COVID, or just when, that's 2 years away, that trip to Europe, maybe I will just spend some money on this outfit or whatever it is now. Staying motivated in tough times, it must be hard. And for athletes, how do you suggest, or some tips do you do for your athletes on that?
Yeah, so we keep the big picture in mind, right? So we'll have them break down their goals, like the big picture in that case would be like the trip to Europe, right? Or even if it's far out. I mean, because like you said, the time in between can kind of affect that motivation, right? But for athletes, they might be in grade 9 or whatever, and they're looking to get a college scholarship. So that's a few years away, 4 or 5 years away.
Yep.
So, but keeping that big picture in mind, and also the feelings associated with that. So, if they shut their eyes and they just sort of visualize what that feels like, right? When I'm playing for such and such team and I got this full ride scholarship and I'm scoring the game-winning goal in the national championship, just sort of like tuning into that, I think that can be really motivating too. As soon as they open their eyes, they're like, yes, I'm ready. Let's get out and practice. Right. So keeping that big picture in mind, and also being really strategic with their planning. And so I think a lot of times for athletes and even for humans in general, like we talked about resolutions earlier, the biggest reason why resolutions don't work is because there's no plan of action put in place. It's just like, oh yeah, I want to do this. That's what I want for this year. But then that's the extent of it. We don't do any more planning after that. And that's why they fail for the most part. And especially with younger people, right? Teenagers who are just learning this, it's really important for them to not only set the goal, but then also work backwards from that goal and set smaller goals along the way. So intermediate goals, short-term goals. And then with those short-term goals, which would be like within this next year, come up with that plan of action to actually move the needle forward to accomplish those things. So whatever that looks like for them. And you would be amazed, like when I do this exercise with these kids, they're like, I'm like, do you feel so much better about this now? And they're like, oh my God, I never would have known. I never would have come up with this stuff. Because if they don't have that plan, something that they're doing every day, small thing every day, leading towards something, it just falls apart. And that's really frustrating, because then they don't get closer to their goal. They don't achieve their goal. And then they're just like, why am I even trying? Right? It's a vicious cycle. And so really having that plan of action, what is it going to take for me to get there? Okay, what do I need to do to get that? What do I need to do to get that? What does that look like on a daily basis? And then putting it in their schedule at specific timeframes is really huge, because then it's easy, right? It's like, they just have to do it, right? So that motivation is a little bit easier. That, and the last thing is knowing that they don't have to spend 2 hours outside practicing their free throws. That's way too long. Just a lot can be accomplished in just 20 minutes a day or 20 minutes every other day.
Yep.
And I think that alleviates a lot of pressure for them too, knowing like, oh my God, this isn't a 2-hour venture. It's just, I can do anything for 20 minutes, right?
Yeah, no, I really like that. Yeah, and if you have a goal, something like that, but you don't have a plan, it's just a dream. Yeah, that's
Exactly. I love that quote.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah.
I've kept you long enough. I've loved it, and I really would like to get you back on the show, because this has been just so interesting, Danielle. The last thing I always ask is, have you had a best piece of advice that you've been given?
Yes.
Whether from a past coach or a parent or just something you might have heard.
Yes. So from my dad, who is my dad and also was my coach pretty much my whole life, something that he said to me that I have never forgotten and I keep in my mind all the time, and now say to my athletes all the time: if you never ask, the answer is always no.
Yeah.
I just love it so much, right? So you can ask, the answer might be no, yes, right? But if you never ask, the answer is always no. And then you always have that what if in your mind. Oh, well, what if I would have asked? What would they have said, right? So I love that, especially when you're talking with athletes and addressing their coaches, asking for certain things and that sort of thing. So if you never ask, the answer is always no. So ask.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much. I encourage anyone who's listening to definitely get your book, The Empowered Athlete. But just absolutely, check your website out. It's got so much great stuff, and so many of the things you talk about, you can just apply to everyday life. And there's so many things I've just heard today. So I really, really appreciate your time here today, Danielle.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Mark. This was a lot of fun, and I can't wait to come back.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to know more about Danielle and her work, visit www.ocppt.com. I'll repeat that, www.ocppt.com. Or feel free to email me on admin@themoneysandwich.com, or visit our website if you have any questions or would like to learn more.
Want more practical, easy to understand tips and action lists to help with your money stuff? The latest version of my book, The Money Sandwich, is now available to order on Booktopia and Amazon, as well as available at all popular bookstores. Everyone deserves to retire comfortably and on their own terms. Make this the year you take action. As with every podcast, this information is not advice, as not personalized to your own situation. And past performance is never guaranteed for the future. What we are trying to do here is to provide tips, coaching, and education to help improve your money knowledge, which we believe can only be a good thing. See you next time when we take another bite from the Money Sandwich.